love to read philosophy, and I love to read about the philosophy of the ancients in particular, and what has survived from ancient philosophy. So I tend to find a writer or a thinker, and then I'll go through as much as their work as I can consume. 7 years ago, I was really into Aldous Huxley. And prior to that, I was into Emerson. And then prior to that, I was looking at female writers in Rome, and the first woman who ever wrote a dialogue was in the 1400s, and she wrote a dialogue on the infinity of love. Her name is Tullia de Argone. And then right now, I'm reading a lot of Peter Kingsley, a philosopher from the UK, who has done a marvelous job helping his readers understand where logic and reason comes from.
Peter, who's the metaphor for that? And Kingsley, who's the metaphor for that? And then what's his study about? What's his book about? I didn't get that. Better listen again.
In Western civilization, and he looks at pre-Socratic notions of logic and reason and the initiation process.
What's the most logical dogma in the history and history of this God-forsaken planet? What's the most logical? Call it religion, call it philosophy, call it truth, call it honesty in the history and history of this God-forsaken planet.
Of receiving logic and wisdom, and a lot of it is quite divine.
No, it's divine in wisdom, in logic, and reason, and logic, and wisdom, and truth. Peter King. Who's the one and only king? Who's Peter she's talking about?
There's this element of connection to the sacred, and there's no...
Who's the one and only sacred and the one and only divine she's talking about?
Difference between the connection to the sacred and logic and reason. It's actually one thing. And he teaches...
Is the sacred, the divine, is that the one and only totally logical and totally logical? Totally, is logical common sense? What does the light say? The one and only God Almighty, the one and only scientific evidence, the one and only common sense. Is she using words that say and mean the same thing? From the one and only King of all kings? Or is she talking about the one and only King of all kings? Or is she just talking about Peter King, the writer she referred to from the UK? We better listen again.
At Parmenides and Empedocles, who were the earliest fathers of Western civilization, they brought forward logic and reason from Persephone, the goddess of the underworld, and he talks about why that matters, because, Persephone is where life on Earth comes from. And if life on Earth comes from the same place that logic and reason comes from, and nature comes from the same place logic and reason comes from, then perhaps they're the same thing. And the impact that has had on me today, looking at the age of AI, is that we need to look to nature as our source of guidance on how we go about framing AI's purpose in our world.
You say we just need to listen more than obviously to one and only all moral, all scientific evidence all common sense God Almighty? Or is she saying we only need to listen to the one and only logical and the one and only? What else did she say besides logical?
Our world is a natural world, and we're going to have to find a way to integrate that and the technology that we now have, permeating every aspect of our life.
How did you know?
Is she saying we need to all integrate the one and only, all moral, all scientific evidence, all common sense, all logical, all wisdom, God Almighty into our life and listen to God more than obviously it's not a fraud? Are we supposed to act like the media who cross us? What? What does the media say? What do so many podcasters say? Or is it SSAY when we say, with the ugly and the smugly and the fugly, cross us say with ugly, smugly, fugly, despicable, deplorable, horrible, ill-morable lies about the one and only God Almighty. And if they're not talking about the one and only God Almighty is God, then is that a crass-ass lie? Is that a lie spewed like no lie has ever been spewed in the history and her story of this God forsaken planet? Who's moving human skin in real time? Is that only possible by the one and only, all moral, all common sense, all scientific evidence, divine and sublime and humanly impossible sign? We need to think about that. What's an ugly, smugly, fugly rat? What's worse and more perverse than a flying rat? Or is a flying rat a bat